Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We've got a brand new book. We are live doing this on November 10th, which might seem a little premature to be talking about Advent, but it's not that premature. If you think of what Advent is about, what Advent does, us starting now, I think is not only a workable solution, but maybe even particularly appropriate. And we'll get into that. But we are getting started today on unwrapping the names of Jesus. And I'm going to take a stab at the author's name of Asherita Choo Choo. So I looked up that CIU based off of the fact that she said she was Romanian. And the Romanian pronunciation guide that Mr. Google gave me suggests that her name would be pronounced Choo Choo. I hope that's right or close. I don't know any better, so if somebody does, feel free to correct me. But if I mention Choo Choo, I am not talking about a train, but I am most likely referencing our author. Let me kind of get us started with a reminder, because not everybody had the chance to hear this, but my goal was for us to read kind of this introduction called Why Celebrate Advent, the prayer at the end of it, and then have the chance to talk about how to lay out the daily and weekly devotional for the rest of our classes. So after today, my assumption is that we will have four more times to come together and go over stuff, which will correspond to the 4 weeks of Advent, except we're going to be doing it on Wednesdays. The next one will be the 17th, next Wednesday of November. We'll take off the week of Thanksgiving because it's the day before Thanksgiving. And some of us may be traveling, some of us may be cooking, some of us may be preparing. And then we'll pick back up again on December 1st. And then December 8th. Those are the 4 weeks. We also have December 15th if we would like to get together to talk about the last section, which is actually about Christmas itself, which I think would be perfectly fine. Makes a lot of sense. Oh, wait, no. I'm sorry. I'm wrong. The 15th will be the 4th. I'm looking at a paper that I had to adjust, and I forgot to adjust. So the 15th of December will be our last class, and we can talk about the Christmas pages in the end, but we'll be dealing with that fourth week of Advent. In a general sense, if you look through the book at all, the first page or two of every section starts the week off as the week should start off, which is on Sunday. So the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, and then it gives us kind of a theme. And then there are 5 days of devotional material. Is that right? For each week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then when we come together, if we were to have covered that whole thing, my assumption is that read the days 1 through 5 at some point during that week, perhaps a day at a time would be best. And then the Sunday lesson, you either can read to start off with as your first day, or if you want to save it for Sunday, I think that would be perfectly fine too. But since we're going from Wednesday to Wednesday instead of Sunday to Sunday, it just might take a little adjustment on our parts as far as what we feel best about. I know that I have the tendency to cram chapters, like in our last book. Oh no, I've got class tomorrow. Let me stay up late tonight and read our chapters. To whatever degree possible, I would encourage us all to read these daily chapters a day at a time. They're not long. They're about a page and a half, page front and back, and these are relatively small pages. There are some scripture readings that you can look up on a daily basis that would lengthen that if you wish. But it's not, the book itself and these daily devotions aren't so much about plowing through content, you know, making sure we cover all the bases, so much as it is a little prayerful contemplation. Because I think that's where the strength of Advent is. In a season of the normal calendar year that feels very full, it feels very rushed, and it can feel very stressful. One of the great gifts of Advent is this slowed pace of preparation. There's kind of a rule of thumb in martial arts that slow is fast and fast is slow. What that means is when you rush a technique or when you rush your movements and responses, you tend to make mistakes. And therefore, you actually accomplish your goal more slowly than if you took your time and with the correct speed that you are capable of doing it well. You become more efficient in a sense, and you actually finish and accomplish your task in less time, because if you do it smoothly and properly, you only do it once. Imagine it like this. You've got to get somewhere across town and you're running out of time. But if you speed too much and get pulled over by the cops, you're definitely going to be late. So sometimes it's worth it to not go as fast as you possibly can, but only going as fast as you know you should. So that's my general encouragement, which I'm not telling you so much as I'm reminding myself. Do a little bit at a time, and genuinely think and pray, because that's what this book can allow us to do if we'll do it. And if we don't, and we just sort of read the chapters as quickly as possible, the morning of, we'll get some good information, I think, because I've already skimmed through some of this, and it seems like good stuff. But I think there is a gift of our own Advent preparation through taking a little bit of time. So to not have this as just one more thing to get through as quickly as possible. Christmas and getting ready for Christmas has enough of that already. But allow this to be a little breather, a little break, but with a purpose. So I thought we would talk just a little bit. Could you grab that door, Sharon? Just a little bit about the nature of Advent. If you read over her little introduction, she kind of talks about it, not just historically, but very personally, how she became acquainted with it. I wanted to elicit some Christmas stress stories. And I thought I would start off by taking one that my mom won't be able to use, and she'll have to make up a different one. So I was very young. I'm 4 or 5 years old, I'm assuming. My parents were given an invitation to come to Kentucky and enjoy a white Christmas. Some friends of the family had moved out of state several months prior, and living where they did, and us being Floridians, this seemed like kind of a unique and special opportunity. So let's just say, even at my age, I have never experienced a white Christmas. It didn't work back then, and I haven't seen one yet. But I have in my mind, thanks to movies and books and other people's stories and just kind of this, I don't know, there's almost a meta narrative that, that seems to transcend time and space, that Christmas involves sleigh rides and snow drifts and snowmen and snowflakes and, you know, fireplaces with chimneys and hot apple cider as you go caroling, wearing earmuffs and mittens and all this kind of stuff that, you know, as a kid growing up in Orlando, all seemed like, you know, it was all very theoretical to me. You know, we cut out snowflakes from paper like everybody else did, but it was an academic exercise only. I'd never seen a snowflake, nor was I likely to ever see one. This trip when I was very young, I think was intended to give to my sister and I this perfect wintry Christmas. And it was like the worst experience ever. We got up there and it was bitterly cold, but no snow whatsoever. We were put downstairs in the basement on an unheated waterbed.
Oh my God.
And this family, which we had been close to when they lived in Orlando, the marriage was now crumbling, and there was about to be a divorce. And so there was open and ugly hostility the entire time we were there. Every part of it was miserable and awful. And I'm not sure if it was Christmas Day or the next morning, but basically with a longer trip anticipated, my dad just said, we're leaving, threw stuff in a car, and we hit the road. So, you know, to this day, I have never experienced a white Christmas or any of the picture postcard Victorian sort of thoughts that are so almost ubiquitous with the thought, you know, Christmas means, and in the desire to try to make one, we not only missed, but it was horrible. It was like the worst Christmases of our lives. And for me, that fit in pretty nicely with this opening introduction of when you chase the non-essentials of Christmas, it may take you someplace very, very bad. That's not to say there's anything wrong with white Christmases. One day I still hope to have one. But when we lose the focus and the purpose of Christmas, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Number one, because that's not what Christmas is about. And number two, what earthly experience can truly match up to some imagined perfect scene that really occurs only in our minds? So my experience is the corrective to this is the church's gift of Advent. So would anyone else like to toss in some Christmas stressors or Christmas calamities? Sharon?
My experience, somebody invited me to New Jersey. I've never seen snow. I've never been in snow. And so she invited me. I was in the Virgin Islands, so I left from Jamaica, where it's a warm country, to the Virgin Islands, where it's a perfectly warm place.
Is everybody getting that?
Yeah.
Here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, keep going.
And so she invited me over to New Jersey. The first thing she did, she picked me up at the LaGuardia Airport in December without a jacket, without a coat, without nothing. I've never been in a place like that. And so We got to the house and she said, okay, this is it. She left for a week because she was stopping work. And she said, don't turn my heater on because I don't want you to run my heater bill up. So I'm in a 15 degrees where I've never been. It's freezing cold. The one good thing I saw snow, because the snow was as high as Mount. I don't know why. And so it was frozen cold, and she left me there with no heat, no nothing. So my experience for that was very terrible because there was no heat in the house, none, and it was cold because it was like 10 degrees or something. I've never been in nothing like that. And it went for the whole week with me in there with a -5, -10. And I'm like, how does people live in places like that?
You bundle up when it gets to be about 60.
So I went under the cover, bundle up on, and at that point you go under there and you don't get out, even if you want to go to the bathroom. You don't get out, and so I stayed there. It was crazy. That's my experience with Chris and with Christmas.
All right.
Oh, Sharon.
Crazy.
Okay, who's got another one?
I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I had a white Christmas every year. It always snowed, but when I was about 4 or 5, we lived in a little town, and I can remember on Christmas Eve, we just lived a block or so from the church that we went to, which was a Lutheran church. And I remember walking to church with my mom and dad and my brother, and coming home at night. It was a cold, starry night, and we got home, and my mom and dad had our presents in the trunk of the car, and somebody had gotten in and stolen them.
Oh,
No,
Oh,
but
man.
they did the best to make our Christmas happy, and they had somebody come and play Santa Claus and get up on the roof of the house like he's going to come down the chimney. And so, you know, it didn't bother us as small children so much, but it bothered my mom and dad.
Oh, I bet.
Sure.
I bet.
But we always had all the happy things about Christmas.
Good.
Tobogganing and ice skating on frozen ponds and lakes and everything.
Very nice.
Florida was a different story.
Oh,
though.
yeah.
I was 16 when I moved to Florida, and it still doesn't seem like Christmas.
That's all I've ever known. That's all I've ever known. Anybody else?
Well, I've always known white Christmases, but one year, a friend and I decided to go to Cancun for Christmas. That was my first experience for having a Christmas with no snow, bright sunshine, warm temperatures. I guess I'm going to say, like Layla, that it almost felt like it wasn't Christmas.
Yeah, right.
But we went to the church, and the people were walking in and out, and they were singing. It was a nice service, and the kids were getting ice cream cones and walking into the church with their ice cream cones. It was a very different experience, there's no doubt. But I'm back with white Christmases.
Yes.
I am, I'm very tradition minded. It's been my personal experience, but it's also maybe my temperament, how I've been built to feel a connection to, you know, the past, to routine, to habit, to things, thematically, philosophically, to know in a more concrete sense that there's something, you know, bigger, and I'm connected to these bigger things, and there's not just something comforting, but it's very shaping. As I think about the Christmases of my youth and what they have resulted in me, there is a very significant amount of tradition that I connect to celebrating Christmas as a family. Some things are, things that I remember as a child, whether or not my parents were doing it on purpose to instill a tradition, it became one for me. Some things I have developed over the years. Some things have been on purpose, some things have been accidental. But it's grown into something fairly substantial in many ways, that when there is a change or an inability to fulfill one of those traditions, I perceive it, kind of like not having snow at Christmas. For somebody who grew up with it, it feels like you're missing something.
Right.
So I remember my first Christmas Eve with the in-laws, and they weren't going to go to church at all. The whole, there was Lula comes from a big family, and her older sister was married, and they had a couple of kids. We were newly married, and so it's just kind of this wider family. And they had some stuff that they did, but it wasn't what I did, and so it felt sort of strange. And everybody was very amenable to going to church, but they picked a mega church at 4 or 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. And the service itself was very skillfully done, but it was like a concert. Like a lot of mega churches, it was very heavy on music and on preaching, and that was really it. You didn't really even sing that much. You listened more than you sang. And then there was a long sermon, which was very good, and it was done in a sports arena because so many people wanted to be a part of it. And the band was really, really good, and there was lights and smoke and lasers and stuff, and they sang some very pretty, poignant songs. Most of them, though, felt like I was just listening. And they were very good, but when they sang something I recognized as a Christmas carol, it was always as a medley, like one verse or a half a verse of "O Come All You Faithful" that would then shift into something else. And so I walked out feeling like I had missed Christmas. And everybody else seemed really happy and very satisfied, and like, see, we did church and it was great. And I was trying to be a good sport about it, but feeling like I had really lost something. And I was legitimately down and sad. And I wound up finding a midnight mass, maybe 15 minutes away from the house, and went by myself. And it was glorious. And I came home like with everybody all fast asleep, I assume. I just remember feeling like, yeah, I had not missed Christmas. It's funny, but there are elements about that, whether it's midnight mass in particular, whether it's about singing Christmas carols, certainly going to church, that I have so strongly associated with Christmas itself, that if one of those things is not there, it really feels like Christmas itself is missing. Now, I feel like I can justify them. I'm not just making junk up, but anything for you guys that's like, if such and such doesn't happen, it just doesn't feel like Christmas.
Well, Father David, during the pandemic, having Christmas without the possibility of receiving communion was probably the saddest Christmas I've experienced in a long time.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. it definitely seemed, you know, it seemed strange and off, even having our normal services here, but having to not do the things that we had done a bunch of times and kind of, I don't know, do half of what we would normally do maybe, or part way. It definitely felt like there was something off.
Yeah.
For mine, coming from Kentucky, even though the family that was up there was a lot smaller, there would have been maybe 8 or 10 of us at the most.
Okay.
And down here, it's 25 at, when everybody's there.
Right.
It's just more compatible, I guess is the word I want.
Okay.
And the group down here, my first Christmas was because there are several under elementary age at that time. Very noisy, lots of fun for the kids. It was just a sit there and watch for the
Okay.
adults.
All right.
I kind of missed the feeling of Christmas that I was used to.
Okay. What else? What's a Christmas tradition where if you don't do it, you've missed Christmas?
Well, there's lots of them, but mine has always been church.
Church. Yeah, I thought mine was church until I went to the wrong church, and I realized there was something about it. Like, again, it was very skillful, but I felt like I missed it.
It was a theatrical production.
Well, but I don't want to be unkind. It was just not what I was ready for, and it wasn't what I was looking for. You know, we'll get into this, but part of the reason, and it's not lost on me that this book is written by an evangelical who probably goes to a church a lot like the one that I'm describing on that one Christmas Eve, because she has to talk about discovering Advent as an adult and learning about Advent and why don't we use Advent. If you don't have Advent, you're probably kind of Christmased out already by Christmas Eve. It sort of feels like the period at the end of a sentence or an exclamation point at the end of a phrase. Whereas if you have been, say, withholding Christmas stuff, you know, you've not sang Christmas carols, you've not, you know, done a lot of Christmas activity, you know, you've been more of an Advent posture than a Christmas posture, then, you know, we really hit, oh, come all you faithful at the beginning of Christmas Eve services and joy to the world at the end of Christmas services with a level of gusto that I think you can only do if you've purposefully not been singing it every day for the past 6 weeks. Now, if you start, you know, all of your Christmas stuff in October or November, by December 24th, you're either sick of it or it's just very, very familiar.
If you're in the stores and the music is playing constantly, that
Right.
you don't want to hear right.
Right. So when I was a little younger, rocking around the Christmas tree was kind of the standard music that would blare at you throughout all of November. These days, for the past 10 years, it's Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. And you just can't avoid that thing. And, you know, pretty much anywhere you go in a store, you're going to hear that song 100 times between now and December 24th. So it's kind of interesting to think about this book and this work and this very purposeful Advent coming from someone who did not have that particular tradition, but has had to learn it late. You know, basically all of us here have experienced either a fair amount or a lot of experience with Advent. And so we approach it conceptually a lot differently than I think she did, because she didn't understand it, she didn't experience it, she didn't grow up with it, whatever it might be. But I'll say, to take that church service again that I'm talking about, it was kind of like a concert. As beautiful as the singing was, I wanted to sing myself. I wanted to sing Silent Night. I have not sung Silent Night with a bunch of people yet. And if you've been singing it for weeks at a time, then it's no big deal. As a matter of fact, listening to an extra special solo version may be sort of nice. But if you've not been doing it, and then you think you're going to do it, and then somebody does it for you, well, that's maybe where it feels a little different.
I remember several years ago, my husband and I were spending Christmas Eve with my youngest son and his family, and they went to church at TBA.
Mhm.
And so they wanted us to go to church with them, so we did. And the opening song, they didn't sing hymns, the opening song was Jingle Bell Rock.
Okay.
I just could not get over that. And then they had someone dress up like the Grinch, and he was all over, jumping over the seats and going in and out of people, and pinching them, and
Okay.
that was church.
And stuff like that I think is really fun, honestly. But
What's it?
for Christmas Eve, there's something that I would be missing. And some things you don't realize you miss them until you miss them. The pandemic's been an excellent example of that for 2 years, of all the things we didn't realize we missed until we couldn't. Even things that we didn't realize we were fond of. How many people who weren't huggers during the peace would love a hug right now? Because it's not so much that you want something all the time, but when you're purposely prevented from doing it for a long period of time, you realize there was something good about it that you miss.
That's true.
So as far as these traditions are concerned, and some of them are very specific and some of them are more, kind of generalized. It could be a food that you eat. It could be a practice that you do. It doesn't have to be overtly spiritual so much as it just kind of connects in what feels like a very essential way. I'm going to argue that such things do have a spiritual component, and let me try to explain why. So one of the things that, again, to pick on my mother, that she did a lot of, whether she was trying to make a tradition out of it or not, was baking cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, and then taking the frosting and putting a little green food coloring and shaping the cooked cinnamon rolls on a tray in the form of a Christmas tree, so that the green frosting then made it look like a tree, and there might be sprinkles on it for lights or whatever, but a green Christmas tree from cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. So you have to imagine you're unwrapping gifts, you're sitting around the tree together as a family, maybe you've got a hot chocolate or a cup of coffee, and you also get the cinnamon roll tree. So if she did it accidentally, or she did it a few times and didn't think anything of it, or whether she did it on purpose to drive it into my mind, well, that's where it lives. Because every Christmas morning without fail, I have made a cinnamon roll Christmas tree, and I get my kids involved, and they have never known a Christmas morning without a cinnamon roll Christmas tree. Even with the few times where we've been away, visiting the in-laws or whatever, I always make sure that it's there and available. And they're old enough now where I've gotten to the point of kind of being more explicit with them. I really do hope that one day you guys make this for your children. And part of that is the tradition of carrying something along generational. Like my mother blessed me. I wanted to bless my children, and I want them to bless their children. But the Old Testament is filled with direction from God saying, build a monument to the sacred, stack stones, build an altar, and then teach your children. Because they'll see that thing and they'll say, what's that about? And that's going to be a concrete reminder to tell them the story of what God did so that they never forget. And they can teach their children who can teach their children. And so knowledge of the nature and the love and the power of the Lord continues on forever. In nearly every significant Old Testament story comes with an injunction at the end to teach your children. Now, it's not the cinnamon roll itself that is necessarily essential to the birth of Christ, but by the birth of Christ being celebrated in a manner that is both different than another day and is intentional in a repeated fashion, I think is part of trying to honor what God has commanded us to do, to teach the generations in a way that's going to connect, it's going to stick, it's going to seem concrete. There's going to be a reason. It's not just any day, it's this day. And we set apart this day by doing these things. In the Passover Seder, there's a series of questions and answers that the youngest child is supposed to ask, and it's supposed to be answered by one of the oldest adults that gives the opportunity to retell the story of the Passover with things like, well, why do we eat with special ceremony on this night? Why do we eat the bitter herbs? Why do we eat the unleavened bread? Well, each of those things has a symbolic of a part of the Passover story. And so by having a tradition of doing something strange or weird or noteworthy every year, it gives the opportunity to raise the issue every year about why and about what's behind it all, and to then retell the Passover story of God's deliverance of his people. So cinnamon roll Christmas trees for me is a way that I hope within my family for generations still to come, that the birth of Christ is a day set apart from every other. And whether it takes these little added things, lights and presents and songs and whatever, the very formal way that we wake up everybody at once and we bring everybody out to see all of the presents under the tree that we've put out the night before that they haven't seen yet, and have Christmas carols going in the background, all this sort of stuff, the kind of ceremony that we've created around it, that I honestly do hope points to a larger and more fundamental truth. The things in and of themselves that we're doing may not point as directly to Jesus, but we're doing them at all because of him. And it gives us a chance to mark the time in a very particular and a very purposeful way, in a way that I hope makes a difference to them. I know it's made a difference for me, and I want it to keep making a difference, in the family still to come. So I'm not one of those pastors who rails against the commercialism of Christmas. I mean, we all kind of know that it's a problem, and I'm not saying that it's great when we freak out and spend too much money or try to put all of our hopes and dreams on getting just the right thing. I understand the complications to that and how it can be a problem. But ultimately and essentially, even the clumsy ways that we might kind of mess it up, I think actually point to something very precious and very good. That this day is so significant that even people who wouldn't step foot in a church can't avoid it. It's changed everything. And even if you're not quite getting it all the way, having it there to where you can't avoid it, I think is not a bad thing. Having it so ingrained, so ubiquitous, so almost overwhelming. Well, maybe that's not so bad. And maybe even the things that we might sometimes complain about, the buying the gifts and the pomp and circumstance and the busyness and the decorating and everything else, that at their heart, they can still be turned to honor the Lord. And don't we give gifts at all? Because for God so loved the world that he gave. It's not something to toss out because there are problems or excess. I think it's just something that we need to regularly reorient and reprioritize. So the trappings of Christmas don't become kind of too big for themselves. You know, they're good things. I love Christmas trees. I love stringing lights on my roof, trying to get the right gift and wrapping it up and having kids come out, you know, Christmas morning to open them up. But if all of our hopes are on these secondary things, they're just not strong enough to support that. It's like stepping on a wooden plank that's a little too thin. You might crack it or break it. You're supposed to step and walk on things that are thicker and solid and more sturdy. So the Christmas traditions that we have and the ways that we even try to achieve them and fail, I don't think are bad things. But I will say, without Advent, it can be very difficult to keep them in proper perspective. So, in reading over her introduction about Advent, was there anything that stuck out to you?
There was one phrase I highlighted, and because I'm zooming on my Kindle, I can't go back and find it again. But it just something about being stuffed and overcrowded.
Right. Yeah, I saw that.
It was just very visual to me.
Right. Well, she actually makes a phrase about being overstuffed and empty at the same time, I think, or something like that.
That's it.
I'm almost tempted to think about like eating too much candy or having too much dessert. And you eat a lot and you feel full, but it's the wrong kind of full. And you know it. You know it's the sort of full that gives you a headache.
This is a mistake.
And you're going to be hungry later, and it didn't really satisfy you, but now you're full and you're uncomfortable. And the busyness of Christmas can result in that. And if you think about, you know, Christmas being very sweet, and it is, but a lot of the celebrations and trappings are very sweet. You know, it's like trying to eat candy canes all day long. You know, eventually it's just gonna make you sick.
These don't have any numbers on the pages, so I can't tell you where I am.
Okay. I've
I've
got numbers at the bottom.
I mean,
They're
it's
real
my-
small.
It's my eyes,
They're
I'm
real small.
sorry.
Yeah, it's very faint.
I'm sorry, I can't see it. Anyway, we all suffer from soul amnesia, and she talks about, and then on the next page, she's saying, try adopting different body positions. And that paragraph, just after talking about having soul amnesia, I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. That's
Okay.
to think about.
Okay, good. So who remembers reading over that phrase soul amnesia? That was a pretty good one. It's a pretty good one. And that is a a very regular phenomenon of, if amnesia is a lack of remembering or a forgetting, to not remember who the Lord is and what he's done. And you can say, well, of course we remember. Yeah and no. So in the same way that you can't really remember the tangible physical experience of pain, our brains just aren't wired that way. We remember that we were in pain and we can vaguely, kind of put it together in our heads, but we can't recreate it mentally. The same thing is probably true with joy. There have been moments, an answered prayer, a miraculous gift, some kind of deeply spiritual moment. And right then, the feeling that we had of worshiping in the splendor of the Lord, and it's so profound, and it's like how deep, how wide, how broad. It's not the love of God we're talking about. It's almost like our experience at that moment, but then the moment is gone. And we can remember it happening and we can be grateful, but that moment itself doesn't last, day after day. Whatever sense of awe and gratitude we have at the time, it just sort of gets lost in the shuffling of papers of our day-to-day lives. So the soul amnesia, I would liken it less to like a completely missing gap, so much as it is like my desk in my office gets buried under paperwork. Stuff gets set on top of it, buried in there somewhere. Still there, but you're not looking at it. And you might have even misplaced it. So what is the remedy? And these reminders, especially the concrete reminders of the goodness of the Lord, brings it back to our hearts and our minds. So the things that we'd mentioned before about, God commanding Israel to build a monument or to teach their children, us coming up with traditions that have allowed us to, recreate memories or feelings. And as Mary Lou was talking about, mentioning the postures, that is a little recognized part of our liturgy. And even less so now, because, from basically the 79 prayer book onward, kneeling has been really underemphasized. But especially if you're an old time Episcopalian, you were used to standing up, sitting down, kneeling, making the sign of the cross maybe, but there was movement. You bowed your head at certain times. When you went to communion, you either opened your mouth in, kind of silent reverence, or you put your hands forward in such a way that, it was, I've heard it described as like making a throne with your hands. It's always a little twitchy to me when people come forward for communion, or I'll go to them and they just kind of reach out to grab it. It's just like, whoa, it just always feels like when somebody touches you with a static shock. So having our bodies engaged can and does affect our souls.
She even mentions dancing in worship, and I can recall a time when I thought, oh, no, but I can see that.
Okay. Well, so I'll say a lot of the stuff that she mentions, we have the privilege of experiencing, or at least having those resources around us. We might not take advantage of it, or we might even take it for granted. She has some of the discovery of the new, and that can be very exciting, and you can be, you get a lot of focus and purpose when something is new and fresh. For those of us who have done Advent a bunch of times, or, we don't go to this sort of church where you sit at a concert. We go to the sort of church where you were expected to stand, sit, kneel, and respond in certain liturgical frameworks that can become rote and routine for us too. So to be purposeful about why we're doing what we're doing so that we can receive out of it what we should. When Advent starts in a couple of weeks, we're gonna have a lot of stuff here at church to try to give people as many opportunities as possible. And we'll have wreaths and candles and calendars and devotionals and giving opportunities and all sorts of stuff coming at your ears. Not to overload people with more busyness, but to just try to connect as many people as possible, to cast the net as wide as possible. You don't have to do all this stuff, but if you can do one or two of them.
What fits one may not fit another.
That's right. It might work for you, but you like that other thing, or you really identify with that third one. But trying to have as much out there as possible, because the season itself, I think, can be so profound and so good. You can get to Christmas without Advent. You can. People do it all the time. You can get to Easter without Holy Week. But don't you miss something really good when you do?
Yes.
So lighting candles in the proper order of purple, purple, pink, purple does not write your name in the book of the Lamb. But I'm very convinced that some of these small details force us to stop and acknowledge the grandeur of the Lord. That if he's worth us getting the details right, it communicates something not just worshipfully towards the Lord, but it communicates something internally back to our own minds when we tend to forget. Like, no. The details matter. Well, why do they matter? Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. And so the things that we should pay attention to, the big stuff, who we are actually preparing for at Christmas, can then have the proper place, even as we're still doing all of the outward trappings. What else?
Something I missed about Advent for a long time and didn't really understand it was that we're also looking forward to Christ's second coming. Even more importantly, I think, or equally importantly, is his incarnation. And I didn't understand that for a very, very long time. I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, so Advent, meaning, a beginning or a coming of something, really has this double purpose. And it's a real interesting time to think about liturgically and scripturally, and even looking at the lectionary readings that were given, you are really kind of encouraged to imagine living in a world prior to the incarnation. You're given Old Testament readings about the need for a savior, but then typically we are given, even in the Gospels, non-Jesus parts of the Gospels. stuff about John the Baptist, stuff about Mary and Joseph, less about Jesus himself teaching and preaching. And this sense of we've never personally experienced a world without a savior. Trying to put yourself backwards into that sense of hope and sense of necessity, almost desperation, really changes, I think, how we see the gift of Christmas. Instead of an expected thing that rolls around this time of year, it becomes this culmination of long lay the world in sin and error pining. And yet the world remains in a position of Advent in the sense of waiting for a return, waiting for things to be right, waiting for things to be good, waiting for things to be redeemed, waiting for a finality of the story of redemption and salvation, where there's that now but not yet sense of the promise not completely fulfilled and still waiting. And we can't lose sight of that Advent is both, that we celebrate the fulfillment of Advent on Christmas, but it's never completely done, at least not until Jesus returns. And so, in essence, the fourth candle of Advent is always lit. And we're still in sin and error pining, at least for the hope that is within us to be fulfilled finally and completely and eternally. So what else? Well, we'll get back together then next Wednesday, and we're going to read over week 1, and it's about hope. And so we're going to get that first sort of theme on the Sunday reading, but then as the days go on, we are going to get names and titles of Jesus, a different one every day, with the opportunity to kind of consider how those names or titles will both relate to the week's theme, Advent as a whole, and even the rest of our lives. So the readings are not long, but again, maybe give it some time. When it's time to read one, give it a little bit of time. Don't rush. Let it soak. Let yourself pray, and see what the Lord might do for our own preparation over these next few weeks. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.